Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive. Welcome to my live stream about no coup for you, Joe Biden. Is Joe Biden's exit, his withdrawal from the candidacy for the president of the United States in the next election, is that exit actually a coup? So many people are saying this. Is it really a coup? And what can we learn from comparisons with a couple of other coups, one of which the Joe Biden exit has actually been compared to, remarkably, in my opinion, over the last week or two, which was the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union in 1991, in August 1991. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. And the other one is the coup that was against Kevin Rudd as serving Prime Minister when the faceless men of the Labor Party came in and removed him as Prime Minister in 2010, an act he never really forgave and never really got over, and which he described as the coup that killed Australian politics. So there are two other coups that people have talked about. I'm a bit sceptical of the idea that Joe Biden's exit is actually a coup, but we're going to give it a good think through today on the Burning Archive podcast, or podcast YouTube channel, also a podcast, I guess. And we will think about how to have an intelligent conversation about such a controversial topic, such a dramatic, historic event, unprecedented event, people say, in post-war, post-World War II American political history. Joe Biden's withdrawal from the Democratic presidential nomination at the age of whatever he is, 82. Okay, so whether you're joining me live or whether you're watching in the replay, leave me a chat and a comment. I really do like to respond to all the comments I receive on the channel, because I think what I hope to achieve with this channel is help you all and to have myself some intelligent conversation about history and culture and its geopolitics. So much of the general media discussion of that is pretty dumbed down and pretty cheap and sensationalized. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have this discussion about the coup against Joe Biden, because I guess it's a case of a really bad historical comparison, sensationalizing an issue and concealing what's really going on, not in a sort of conspiracy theory way, but actually not really detecting the deeper problems of the political institutions, political culture of the United States, and more broadly, liberal democratic societies in the West. So do say, yeah, I've got a few comments from everyone. Thanks from David K and Kent. They're great comments. I will absolutely, what I want to do is sort of go through the sort of initial discussion and come back to comments. But yeah, look, lots of people don't like Kevin Rudd, and I guess I think, is it David K says, personally, I'm not a fan of Kevin Rudd, and I find him to be quite strongly anti-China in his views. And Kent says, thanks in advance for your perspective, always enlightening. And yeah, I think that's part of the thing with Kevin Rudd, that sometimes you need to try to get over the sort of personal antipathies. I myself was not all that much of a fan of Kevin Rudd, as friends and family can absolutely attest. And yet I'm going to actually read from Kevin Rudd's book, or refer to Kevin Rudd's book about his own reflections on the coup later on. And I think just giving in to sort of personal animus, I guess, is often not the way to go. I know that's not what you're saying, David Kay, but it is. I think it's one of the challenges in having a sort of intelligent conversation about politics and history, to try to detach that little bit and try to see it from a broader perspective. All right, so I will respond to questions and comments, but certainly want to get through some initial things first. But certainly, please, everyone, drop your comments in chat and in if you're watching subsequently in the comments, and I will respond to them a little bit later on. And if this is the first time you're here, I'm Jeff Rich. I'm a writer, historian, I've got a PhD in history, and for 30 years I was a government official, but over the last few years I've sort of started to, I left government and wrote and produced content independently here on YouTube, but also on Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. You can see the address there. So if you haven't already done so, check out my Substack. You can sign up for free, subscribe for free, and there's also an upgrade to a paid option. And yeah, absolutely, David Kay. Absolutely, David Kay. I'm going to come back to that comment, David Kay, a bit later on, if that's okay. And so yeah, you can upgrade to a paid description, and there are some, I think, great discussions we're having there. And I also just want to say thanks to all the viewers and subscribers to the YouTube channel. I passed 10,000 subscribers during this last week. Thank you so much. And I got some amazing comments on my videos. I did a video on Yuval Noah Harari, which got some fantastic comments, and some great comments on the video I made last week on the succession crisis in America, and also some great comments on the Emmanuel Todd videos. One comment in particular was asking me about a good guide, history book to the post-1945 world, and I think I'll actually make a video about that topic fairly soon. But you can also go to my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, where I did a series of articles on kind of the history of the multipolar world, including the key developments in the post-1945 world. And so yeah, check all those things. I'm also offering audio books and a guide to geopolitics and history, and of course my 120 Nobel Prizes in Literature challenge, which you can also watch here on YouTube. Okay, so let's get into the main topic of today's video. Thanks, David. Awesome. The main topic of today's video, which is was Joe Biden's withdrawal from the candidacy, odd word to sort of pronounce for me, his candidacy for president next year at the age of 81 or 82, was his removal from that position a coup. And there are some interesting, I guess, stories coming out about what exactly happened. But in brief, it seems that Joe Biden got a bit of a delegation from the leaders of Congress, including Nancy Pelosi and the head of the lower house, the House of Representatives, the Democratic majority leader in America, and a former president, his former president, Joe Biden, his former boss, Barack Obama, and they said to him, according to Seymour Hersh, the journalist with well-established sources in American government, they said to him, well, we're prepared to invoke the 25th Amendment unless you step down as candidate. The 25th Amendment is the amendment inserted after, I think, Woodrow Wilson had a sort of a medical emergency which incapacitated him in office in the early 1920s or late 1910s, and created a mechanism within the constitutional law of the United States to remove a disabled, incapable president. And Joe Biden said, well, I don't want to do that. I will, in fact, withdraw, but was obviously a little bit shirty about it. And many people have been saying, well, that is a coup. And let's look at some of these examples. So we have, for example, Donald Trump saying that Joe Biden's exit from a 2024 presidential race was a coup. You can probably understand why his political opponent would use that term, because it helps to delegitimize the new candidate, Kamala Harris. It kind of creates a bit of a sense of sensation and drama and all the rest of it. The American Senator Tom Cotton has said that Joe Biden succumbed to a coup by Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Hollywood donors, ignoring millions of Democratic primary votes. Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy. And certainly one of the features that people are picking up in talking about the coup is this decision by the major Democratic donors to say, well, we're not going to donate the money to Joe Biden. But is that really a coup? Is saying, well, we don't think you're going to win, so we're not going to give you the money, Joe. It is our money, and it's our, I guess, democratic right to decide what to do with it. Is that really a coup? And thanks for all the comments in chat, Sky. I'm definitely going to come back to them a little bit later, but I just want to make sure I do this initial part of the video for all the especially for all the viewers coming later on. And then then we have another journalist. Hang on, that's not the right one. There we go. Another journalist saying remarkably, this is a first post, which I think is like a conservative magazine in the United States, saying that now that Joe Biden's decision to endorse Kamala Harris after he was pushed to withdraw from his candidacy was a coup for a coup, that it was his sort of revenge, saying, okay, I'm going to endorse Kamala because that will teach you in some sort of way. So it's getting a little bit ridiculous, I think, some of the use of these terms. Coup. On the other hand, there are other voices who are saying, no, the Biden-Harris switch is not a coup. This is from a magazine called The Intelligencer, which doesn't entirely thrill me with its reliability. And then, so there's absolutely a debate about this. And you can see, particularly in the political rhetorical debate, why people would talk about it as a coup, because it's effectively it's a slur on the legitimacy of both the previous and the new candidate. It's sort of saying, well, they didn't really get there by sort of legal means. So you can understand that. But I don't know if it's so forgivable from journalists, and I think it's especially unforgivable from the more independent media who have done such a great job over the last few years in providing more sensible, intelligent, balanced coverage of these political events. But many in the independent media have, I guess, got drawn into this discussion about Biden's withdrawal as a coup again. it's a simple thing to say. It's a great meme in politics, but is it really true? So the Duran have talked about issues in that way. They've had Robert Barnes on, the sort of American lawyer, commentator on politics, who's big on stories of dark conspiracies behind closed doors. And I think perhaps, though, the example that really annoyed me especially was the multipolarity podcast, because using it in a kind of a slang term, a lazy sort of just sensationalist way is, I think not great, but it is sort of forgivable. But the multipolarity podcast, which I think is produced by Philip Pilkington and some other sort of British journalist, and is a reasonable podcast, I think. Has some good material on it, not always the best, but certainly has some good material on it. They did this whole special issue or episode in the last week or so with Malcolm Chayuni, where they said that the removal of Biden was, they compared it to the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev in August 1991, as the Soviet Union was sort of falling apart, which I think they really just did that for a bit of clickbait, a bit of sensationalism, and it was not terribly convincing. In fact, I had a bit of a exchange with Philip Pilkington over Twitter, saying that it was clickbait and it was really, really bad history. And his response was that, well, a head of state was removed, therefore it's a coup. But of course, the head of state wasn't removed. All Biden did was stop being the next candidate for president. He is still president. No actual change in power has happened. Obviously, authority and influence and prestige and all that sort of stuff has been affected, but he still is the serving president. How can you really say that is equivalent to what happened to Mikhail Gorbachev? Really irresponsible journalism. When I first thought about this video/stream, I thought I'd call it the coup that blew the independent media's mind. But I think in a way this is interesting because it just is an example of how it's very easy when things happen that are kind of outside of our expectations or a bit different. We sometimes unthinkingly just assume a whole lot of stuff about what is a democracy and what is conventional political process, what is normal politics, what is not. And all that sort of thing, and start using this kind of bad historical comparison. And I guess it's worsened with the whole, sensationalist, clickbait sort of culture on social media, which I do try to avoid to some degree here on Burning Archive, both in my Substack and on the YouTube channel. So I don't really think that this event of Biden withdrawing his candidacy really is a coup. But just because I think that doesn't limit the way in which people attach their emotions and the meaning to that word. It is clearly a term that has taken off a little bit to describe these events. And so you have to ask, well, why is that term meaningful to people? And I think the answer is there is something grossly wrong in the political process, some sort of violation of a norm or a standard or an expectation or a convention. And so much of politics, so much of government is the sort of implicit conventions and expectations, social norms about how people behave with each other. So I think it is responding to that, but doing it in a sensationalist sort of way that actually doesn't help people really understand what is the problem. In a way, it comes back to the importance of actually thinking about what are the words that we use to describe things and adding a bit of nuance and better judgment to them. So I think hopefully my discussion comparing these three sort of coups will help with that, because I think if we add a bit of nuance to our meanings of the language we use to describe history, the narratives we use to describe history and politics, culture, then we can form better judgments about it. We can really understand, well, what's happening in this particular situation, in this particular time. Clearly, Moscow in 1991 is different to Washington, D.C. in 2024. What is the particulars that help us navigate the situation here in 2024? And so let's have a look at those three coups that I mentioned. So there's the Biden coup in 2024, which we've talked about a bit. Then there is the coup that killed Australian politics in 2010 when Kevin Rudd was removed and replaced by Julia Gillard in highly dramatic events that, every Australian over, I guess, well, it was 2010, so that's 14 years ago. So every Australian over, 30 will remember very, very well. And then finally, August 1991 coup against Gorbachev and the reformers in the Soviet Union. So let me just have a little pause there and just have a check back on the comments. And I'll just pop it out so it's a bit easier for me to read. Give me 1 second, folks. So we have David Kay, not a fan of Kevin Rudd, anti-China view. Yeah, it's interesting. He's ambassador, of course, to the United States at the moment, and I think presents himself as a bit of a China whisperer. Maybe I'll do a whole video on Kevin Rudd one day. And Kent, thank you for in advance for your perspectives, always enlightening. David Kay also says that Kevin Rudd can be more reasonable regarding Russia, but I find his views on China flawed. Same as John Mearsheimer. So, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to be doing a video on John Mearsheimer and how realistic his realism actually is in a week or so, I think, on the channel. So do check that one out. Congratulate David Kay. Congratulations on the 10K subscriber milestone. Thank you very much. Kent, do you think you are shadow banned for your content? Look, I just don't know. The content I've been doing recently seems to be doing pretty well. I know I'm always a bit wary of doing stuff on the Russia-Ukraine situation, but because I think that there is stuff that happens there. But I might be wrong. Maybe it just was bad stuff. I don't know. But yeah, don't know. But things have been going pretty well recently. So that's cool. GL says 100. Fish says I'm deeply concerned about the world today, Jeff. I feel that the West is fractured and we're headed towards something big. Do you feel the same way? Yeah, very much so. Very much so. It's there's the news just today about the possible conflict or escalation of the conflict in Lebanon and Iran, and it is a challenging thing, and I think it's a challenge for all of us to try to keep a sense of calm and what we can and can't control in these events, but also not to let the I guess the stories that we tell ourselves about, the world ending, a cataclysmic war coming close, sort of destroying us. But I do feel fundamentally there is a big shift, which over on my Substack, I wrote a series of pieces talking about the changing tides of globalization, that really the initiative in the world has sort of changed. Globalization is no longer westernization. The energy, the resources, the ideas, the power is flowing around the world in a different direction these days, and that's very challenging for people in the West to accept, I think. And David Kay says, I'm glad that Trump did not select Tom Cotton or Marco Rubio for VP. Fellow citizen, heart, thank you. The faceless men, I thought it was the shadowy figures. Oh yeah, faceless men. I don't know which country you're from, fellow citizen, but the faceless men of the Labor Party is a sort of like it's a trope in Australian political language that dates back to the 1960s, referring to the sort of kind of the party bureaucrats who used to control things, who would not appear in the media. And of course, media is much more ubiquitous than it was now back in the 1960s, but had a lot of power. So yeah, shadowy figures, I guess. Kent says they're spending this money now and will exhaust the majority of it prior to the next change of batter. Yeah. And fellow citizen says the Biden coup seems to me internal faction-based, though not a profound shift in the future, as was the coup against Australia. I feel that's probably true, and we'll get back to that in a sec. Kent says plausible deniability has become the shield of the politician. These people have a duty to seek excellence. Interesting point, because this is an issue that's raised in Kevin Rudd's reflections, which I'll come back to. Fellow citizen says Robert Barnes turned me off with his anti-Semitic support for Zionism, so I've not kept up with his takes. Yeah, I've got to say I found the recent Duran show with Robert Barnes a bit hard to take, and I sort of turned it off after a little while. Even though I love Alexander and Alex, I'm not a great fan of Robert Barnes. And David Kay, I suspect discussing the Victor Yanukovych coup is too politically fraught. Well, I could do that, but yeah. I think if anyone has the chance to read Glenn Deason's The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order, and of course Richard Sakwar's books about frontline Ukraine and others, I think they're very much worth a read and a good understanding of those events. And looking forward to your take on Mearsheimer. And David Kay says, I appreciate your calm, measured approach. It's refreshing. Excellent. Well, there we go. And what's your opinion of Paul Keating's foreign policy reviews? It seems quite reasonable to me. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that will be a great discussion for another day, I think. But he has just published a piece in Pearls and Irritations at johnmenadue.com that really criticises Australia's subordination to America, in which I really sort of agree with him. So, and so, yeah, I think he has some really excellent foreign policy reviews. So let's get back to comparing these three coups. And we'll talk about them. And in a way, what would be good, I think, is I'll just move the chat over there and we'll come back. It's good to think about what is an actual definition of a coup d'etat. Now, coup is from a French word, coup, or I guess strike against the state or hit against the state. Coup, it's a word means something like that. I'm not entirely sure of the exact term, But I checked the Oxford Dictionary of Politics and International Relations for a definition of a coup d'etat when I was sort of saying, well, is there any legitimacy of this argument that what on the surface seems to have just been, a quiet chat with an elderly gentleman about, you probably need to stop driving the car now, Joe, or else someone's going to get hurt, has been turned into a comparison with, tanks rolling into Moscow and emergency decrees and all that sort of thing. So the definition in an Oxford Dictionary of Politics and International Relations of a coup d'etat is the sudden, forcible and illegal removal of a government, usually by the military or some part thereof, often precipitated by more immediate grievances bearing directly on the military or security agencies, I guess. So, so the number one thing is a government has not been removed, has it? The government of America has not changed one bit. There has been a sudden change in the plans of the president to run for office, but it wasn't forcible. There was no violence. There were no security guards, nothing like that. And it wasn't illegal. In fact, by all accounts, it was perfectly legal. They said to Joe, we are prepared to invoke the 25th Amendment of the Constitution to remove you, but we will give you the option to do it with dignity and to remain in office. So in a way, it's almost the exact opposite of a coup. Anyhow, that is the coup, and I think it's important to, I guess, don't be pedantic about definitions, but to try to turn any sort of, shift in political control or influence into that, I think, is really being pretty sloppy in your analysis. And I think looking at some of these comparisons is a great example of how just with a little bit of history, you can kind of calm down, restore a bit of peace of mind, and improve your political judgment about events. So let's look at these three coups. The one involving Mikhail Gorbachev in the USSR, and the one we've already looked a bit at Joe Biden, and then also the 2010 Australian coup. Well, so I'll just do the high points of the comparison. So what happens in 1991 in the Soviet Union? Now, I'm not sure how much people know about the broad history of the Soviet Union, but just briefly, in August 1991, there was a coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev had been, for I guess about the previous 5 years or so, the leader of the Soviet Union. Initially, the General Secretary of the Communist Party. Then he set up a whole lot of political reforms, and he became then the first elected president, or the first president of the Soviet Union, separated from the party and in some form of early stage democracy. But his reforms challenged a lot of people, and there were a lot of challenges in implementing them. I think I'll probably do a whole video again soon on this whole series of events. But some of those people who had the grievances as described in this definition, the immediate grievances bearing directly on the military, arms reductions, reductions in influence, reductions of party system controls over government, the independent media, independent political representation, investigations of crimes of the party over the previous 30 or 40 years. All those sort of grievances and a concern about, I guess, the foreign policy direction and the threat to power of the party oligarchs led to some generals and party officials actually arresting Gorbachev and sending tanks into Moscow. I've got a couple of pictures of those tanks, but I wasn't clever enough to sort of line them up for you. But you can, if you Google, August 1991 coup against Gorbachev, you will see pictures of those tanks, and Boris Yeltsin made helped become a more popular figure by sort of opposing those tanks, sort of removing the government. And those military, security and party officials actually declared an emergency regime. And Boris Yeltsin, although he made a big show of opposing the tanks and opposing the coup, also exploited the situation, because all the various constituent republics like Russia and Ukraine and Belarusia and all the other 17 or so federated republics of the Soviet Union were also manoeuvring for power in the era of after the Cold War, with US support for their power. And just to give you a little bit of a flavour of what this was actually like, let me just read a little bit from Vladislav Zubok's fantastic book Collapse 1991. And he describes the moment when Gorbachev is in his villa in Crimea, and the coup plotters contact him about whether he should come back. And he got a strange call from one of these plotters asking about his health and whether he was really, in good enough health to return to Moscow. A few minutes later, the head of his personal security service, Major General Vladimir Medvedev, came to see him. Medvedev looked confused. The KGB guards on the perimeter had just let a group of visitors into the villa without Gorbachev's authorization. The 5 phones on Gorbachev's desk had all gone dead, from his local landline to the red satellite phone used to reach the Ministry of Defense. The most powerful man in the country, the commander-in-chief of the Soviet armed forces in control of the nuclear button, had been made incommunicado by order of Kryuchkov. And so that is a coup. That is not what happened to Joe Biden. There's all sorts of weird conspiracy theories about his signature and the fact that he didn't really appear in the media for a little while, which is hardly surprising given his state of mind and state of health. But it is clearly way, way, way different to that coup. What about Australia in 2010 when Kevin Rudd came to power? And, this talk of this unprecedented coup resonated, that has been going on in America and Britain and all the rest of it, including in the independent media, has resonated very differently in Australia, where from 2010 to, I guess, whenever Scott Morrison became Prime Minister. I can't quite remember when that was. There were a rolling series of leadership struggles, leadership spills. Australia became known in the sort of London press that always loved to do this about Australia as the coup capital of the world. And the events in, I can't remember what month it was, I think it was June or July 2010, involving Kevin Rudd were incredibly dramatic. Factional hacks removed Rudd effectively, brutally, within 24 hours through a caucus vote, although I think in the end no vote was had because the numbers had been all worked out, and leaked media stories. Famously, there was a union official who was not even a member of parliament, had no formal political authority at all, was one of these, faceless men of the Labor Party who controlled a lot of the factions within the Labor Party. He, and I guess the equivalent to the donors in the United States, who appeared on television and said, kind of Rudd's got to go. Again, so in this event, the head of the government was actually removed within 24 hours in a, there was sort of dramatic scenes of, strange meetings going on in Parliament and Chinese restaurants in Canberra and all the rest of it. It was extraordinary, and there was a excellent documentary made in Australia about it called The Killing Season, I think, which gives you a sense of, the tone of things. And then, the Rudd then conspired to get rid of Gillard, and then there were all sorts of weird stories about Rudd being, totally unhinged and all the rest of it. And then we had Tony Abbott, and there was a coup against him, or a leadership transition by Malcolm Turnbull, and then Scott Morrison. Then there was a move by Peter Dutton, I think, and Scott Morrison against Malcolm Turnbull. So we had 7 to 10 years of rolling political crisis around leadership in Australia. But ultimately, in 2010, though, Kevin Rudd gave this famous performance the day after, where he sort of cried in the garden outside Parliament House and looked, talked about his testimony and looked, like a shattered man. But he ultimately sort of stayed in Parliament and plotted his return. No one arrested him. No one sent security guards around the lodge, nothing as dramatic as that. No one introduced emergency decrees or shut off his telephones, quite the opposite. But Kevin Rudd, as we'll see, later declared that this was the coup that killed Australian politics, and certainly it was in a series of events that, I guess, popularised the term coup. So let's then look finally at Joe Biden's events in 2024, where he what's happened. So what we know is that, if we take Seymour Hersh's account, which seems to be validated by people, or corroborated or well-sourced, effectively Barack Obama was the authoritative elder statesman who went to Joe Biden, who clearly, has been Joe Biden's boss, so, is going to be, and is an esteemed figure, of politics. So if you can imagine yourself in that situation with your, like, I don't know, sporting club or something like that, and the president of the club, has got to go. You're not just going to get some, junior person to give him the bad news. You're going to have to give the bad news to this person by someone important. So it's not in any way illegitimate that Barack Obama is going to do that. He is just a effective messenger. And then he goes with congressional leaders, Nancy Pelosi and the other congressional leaders whose names I've forgotten, I'm afraid, to my American audience. And they say that they have consulted the vice president and that the vice president is prepared to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him legally due to incapacity. So effectively, the vice president has arranged with the legitimate elected authorities of Congress and the right spokesperson for a difficult message, Barack Obama, to tell Joe Biden, Granddad, it's not safe for you to drive the car anymore. You've got to give us the car keys, all right? You've got to give up your driver's license. And what's more, over 70%, there's been a subsequent opinion poll that's found over 70% of the public have approved that decision. So, but people in the media have kind of lost their minds about this being unprecedented and undemocratic. And I just think that is, I think it's a wrong interpretation, but the shock and the sense of something being unconventional and wrong, I guess, needs to be respected. We'll come back to that again in a little while. Then I want to talk about specifically Kevin Rudd's reflections on the coup that killed Australian politics from his book. I think it's called The PM Years. And we'll just, I'll talk a little bit about what he has to say there, because I think it's an interesting case of how to explore things. Now, I'm just going to get back to some of the comments and just have a bit of just quickly respond to comments as well as we take a little breather here. So, fellow, just commenting on the Duran, Alex and Alexander are splendid. Heterodoxy is good, but they can also be targeted. Keating, and fellow citizen, also says Keating's press club a couple of years ago was so telling with regard to Murdoch and the New York Times and the ABC. Yeah, absolutely. And Murdoch, who I guess is not just a figure in Australian politics, he's a global figure in Britain and America. Well, I guess maybe not global, but in the Anglo-American world, he is very Anglophone world. He's a very dominant figure in the media, Sky News and Fox in the United States, as well as various newspapers. Kent says, I don't know, but have curiosity and will read. Fellow citizen says, very keen to read Keating's take in Pearls and Irritations. Yep, absolutely. Pearls and Irritations, for those who don't know, johnmenadue.com is absolutely brilliant. I guess independent public policy journal on free on the internet, where you can really get a good perspective, more non-mainstream perspective, especially on sort of foreign policy issues. And there are some great people writing there, Mary Costa-Ketas and Cameron Leckie, Warwick Powell, a few of the people who appeared on the Multipolar Peace Alliance along with me. So do check it out. Thanatar13 says David David Kay agreed, to be honest. As the saying goes, the US doesn't have coups because they don't have US embassies. Yes, true. David Kay says, my facetious definition of a coup d'etat is what happens to foreign regimes that involves the CIA, NGOs, and preceded by US hand-wringing over human rights abuses. Lol, yeah. You know, a few people, I think, including on that show, on the Duran about Robert Barnes, have talked about the need for a church commission in the United States that would sort of, you know, investigate the role of the security and intelligence services in the United States. The Church Commission was the big, I think, congressional sort of committee that was set up in the early 1970s, I think, post all the assassinations of you know, the Kennedys and that sort of thing. And maybe also post Watergate, I'm not 100% sure. And it's often referred to as important, but to be honest, I actually think the issue's gone beyond the United States now. And, you know, those intelligence agencies have messed around in so many countries of the world. All the citizens of the world have an interest in putting the United States intelligence services back into a legal box. And I actually think there should be like some sort of international commission, international convention, or like, you know, like a, you know, almost like a Nuremberg sort of trial into the role of the CIA in other governments around the world, and some sort of new sort of constraints and conventions that will actually put them back in their box. And I'll probably get shadow banned for saying that, but you know, we'll see. Maybe I'll write to someone like Jeffrey Sachs or the United Nations suggesting it. Praetorian Guard violence less coup in 156 AD. That's Brisk Gift 75. Interesting point. Yeah, I mean, there are so many leadership shifts, but I guess I don't know about that one. David Kay, I clearly remember images of Boris Yeltsin perched atop a tank with a bullhorn decrying the coup. Strange times. Yeah, extraordinary times, extraordinary times. I'm going to have to do an episode on those events, I think. I'll probably do that as like a you know, pre-recorded video. Let me just see if we've got other different comments here. Yeah, Thanatar 13, that's incredibly tragic. So much suffering could have been prevented. The end of history, Unipol. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I did a video on Richard Sakwar's book, The Lost Peace, which actually really makes that point. It really is incredibly tragic. Okay, all right. So I might just come back to any of those last comments at the sort of end of the show now, but everyone please feel free to throw in more questions and things. And what I want to do now is just talk about Kevin Rudd's reflections on the coup that killed Australian politics. Now, Kevin Rudd wrote this sort of memoir. I guess he wrote a memoir of his pre-government years, and he wrote a memoir of his period as Prime Minister. And he sort of promoted the book really as, you know, being the coup that killed Australian politics. Indeed, because I've got the Kindle, I searched the word coup in, I've got this particular book on Kindle, I searched the word coup, and he, in his book, the Prime Minister PM years, he mentions the word coup 299 times. he actually describes it as the most important political event this century. And it was, a dramatic event, absolutely. And I actually reflected on it a little bit in my book here, 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. And I wrote an essay in 2015 in this, which is from this 2015 political order and political disorder and decay in Australia, that actually relates all of these events to what has happened at a deeper sort of level in the political institutions and political culture in Australia. And I've got a link to the book in the video description if you want to check that out. But at the end of the book, and Kevin Rudd's understandably perhaps a little bit bitter about what happened to him in June 2010. He says he has got over it and has sought forgiveness and all that sort of thing, or offered his forgiveness, but I don't think many people are entirely convinced that's true. But he does do a little bit of analysis at the end of 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat, fellow citizen. Check it out. And there's an essay in there which actually explains what the title's all about. Because I wrote most of the pieces there when I was a bureaucrat, and it's partly, I guess, talking about my perspective on bureaucrats don't actually talk much in the public domain, but they actually have a much more direct observation of what really happens in government and issues, and a lot of knowledge and insight that is sort of excluded from public debates, partly because of kind of free speech rules or speech code restrictions, and partly because the general culture, and you sort of people bureaucrats and blame the bureaucrats and all that sort of thing. There's it's just used as a kind of a insult term with very little understanding of the insight that a bureaucrat such as myself, now an ex-bureaucrat, might actually have about how do our political institutions and culture really work. And I guess I'm trying to share, now that I'm no longer a bureaucrat, some of those insights here on the channel and whatnot, and mixing it up with my history and whatnot. So sorry for that slight digression there, but Kevin Rudd presents a little bit of an analysis of why this coup is so bad, and he basically says he said on page 590 of the book that Australia stopped being a stable parliamentary democracy, that with all these sort of leadership struggles, this leadership instability, and that it undermined the prospects of robust policy leadership at home and damaged the reputation abroad. So I guess it's not good to have such leadership instability, and I think perhaps that's partly why people are responding to events in a slightly hysterical way in the United States, because I would say it's clearly undermining the prospects of robust policy. Well, it may be undermining the prospects of robust policy leadership at home, although removing, given that it's done on the basis that the current serving president doesn't have the mental capacity to serve, I don't know if it's really undermining those prospects as perhaps restoring those prospects. But it's clearly also damaged the reputation of the United States abroad, its prestige and its authority. But Rudd also says the coups violated some of the deepest subconscious norms of Australian political life. And I have a little section from the book here. So it was kind of a case of brutal power confronting normative convention. And there you can see this little section from my Kindle there. But the uncomfortable truth is that the coup of June 2010 disrupted violently some of the deepest subconscious norms of Australian political life. In some respects, albeit for a different generation, it has been as jarring as the events of November 1975 when the Governor-General removed Gough Whitlam. And some people say the CIA was involved in that one too, although the causes of these deep ruptures in our national body politic were, of course, vastly different. Yet each, however, has resulted in a loss of innocence in the way we go about the political business of our country. Previously unwritten assumptions about the observation of parliamentary conventions given way to the brutal demonstration of raw political power. So that's the justification for using the term coup. There's not real violence, there's not real illegality, but there's a kind of a moral violence, a disruption to our expectations and our conventions. And then Kevin Rudd asks what is driving this instability, and I think that is an important question because I think it sort of gets beyond the I don't want to use the word hysteria, the sensationalist talk about coups, and ask, well, what is it that is clearly generating this instability, this problem with handing political successions, which are just a normal event in any organisation, isn't it? Like, people, get sick, they die, they get old, they get incapable, they lose the knack of what they used to be able to do, they lose popularity, and so everyone has a term, has a use by date. So you just have to be able to manage that. So why have things got so unstable? Why has it become so difficult to handle? And he offers, he offers about 5 explanations of it. First of all, he says there's the cult of the opinion poll. This was a really big thing in Australia. I don't think it's terribly deep analysis, and I don't know if it's has quite the same resonance nowadays because people have become so skeptical about opinion polls since they have been used so often. But then the second point he makes seems to be a little bit more relevant. He says there's a rise of a new generation of political operators, the sort of ex-student politicians of the 80s and 90s, thinking, of course, about Julia Gillard. And I knew Julia Gillard when she was a political operative in the 1980s, a student politician in the 1980s. And, of course, his great nemesis, Tony Abbott. But he is also describing, I guess, this sort of class of what you could almost describe them as political mercenaries. They are people who make their whole careers as advisors, of media advisors, of party officials, and then become parliamentarians, ministerial advisors. They are kind of political operators, professional political operators who have no other life experience, and so form a kind of a social environment, a bit like I was talking about with the Washington Gang with Emmanuel Todd's book, form their own little village, a village called Canberra, of people who just see the political game and don't see anything else. And Rudd says that this has created an ethos amongst these people where politics is political sport, it's not service to the nation, that there's a loss of loyalty, which previously there's sort of a more public-spirited ethos amongst the political professionals had prevented opportunistic political insurrections. And then he has a couple of other interesting observations, which I'm not so sure. And I think that particular observation from Rudd is on the money. I think it's a little bit skewed by his personal experience. And, in a way, you could almost say, well, isn't that the case with Kevin Rudd as well? But it does accord a little bit with some of the discussion Emmanuel Todd has about the lack of ethos, lack of shared collective belief, and the narrowing sociological environment in which politics is conducted in Western liberal democracies, or in Todd's view, Western liberal oligarchies. But then he also says that another factor was the unique politics and of climate change in Australia, because this whole political struggle in Australia between 2010 and 2015 or so was very much, a lot of it was acted out over debates over, climate change policy and carbon taxes and, schemes to reduce, I've forgotten what they were all called now, but various schemes to sort of mitigate the effects of climate change. But what he says is that this caused something which that political culture, that narrow political culture, was simply not capable of doing, of making intergenerational trade-offs, change affecting old people like us, like me, which ultimately younger people will benefit from if, the planet is preserved, and also international sacrifices like the Western countries or China are having to trade off, paths for development. So he says that this unique politics of climate change really made it impossible to do. Now, I don't think that this is the only issue, that those kind of choices exist. Education, pensions, all these sorts of things involve intergenerational trade-offs. But I think it does show that there is a contrast between the seriousness, I guess, of real government, of real decision-making and compromise and negotiation over major issues. If you like, the serious job of diplomacy, which again, Emmanuel Todd says, the Washington gang is so addicted to the theatre of politics, it can't do real international diplomacy. The similar sort of thing, I think there is a genuine point. I wouldn't limit it to climate change, but there's a mismatch between the political culture and the capability of the political elites, let's say, and the real job that they have to do. That they can do the spin job of the the opinion polls and the stunts and the scheming, but they don't do the serious business of government. So I do think there is a problem there. And then he makes some comments about Tony Abbott, but I think we'll just pass over that. But he also says, and I'm sure this will be of interest to international viewers as well, that a particular problem is Rupert Murdoch and his media empire. And here we go. There we go. And let me just read then from his comments. On top of all these factors and skillfully manipulating each of them has been Murdoch, the greatest, most malignant cancer on our Australian democracy. Murdoch is not just a news organisation. Murdoch operates as a political party, acting in pursuit of clearly defined commercial interests. in addition to the relentless prosecution of his far-right ideological worldview. In the UK, Murdoch made Brexit possible because of the position taken by his papers. In the US, Murdoch's Fox News has become the political echo chamber of the far right, which enabled first the Tea Party and then the Trump Party to stage a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, and so on and so forth. So, and viewers in Australia might know, but the viewers around the world will probably not know that Kevin Rudd has also proposed that there be a Royal Commission, so like a major government inquiry into Rupert Murdoch's media organisation and its role in the political culture. And again, I'm not entirely sure that Kevin Rudd's claims about Murdoch are entirely true. It's probably dangerous for me to say it if they were, but I think it can be generalised to say that the role the media does play in today's political world is pretty problematic. So it's certainly, I think, part of the problem with this political institution. But what he overall says is that Murdoch's domineering role, and I think you can see this in some of the current foreign policy debates here in Australia on Gaza and Ukraine, etc., produced a cowering, fearful political culture. So they're his reflections, Kevin Rudd's reflections, on, I guess, the deeper underlying causes of the coup. And I think they do point to some interesting hypotheses about kind of what's going wrong with the political institutions, what kind of political disorder and political decay is really suggested by events like Joe Biden's withdrawal or Kevin Rudd's removal. They're clearly not coups, but they do point to ways in which the system doesn't seem to be working as intended or as we all grew up believing it should. And this is, I think, basically what people are reacting to when they talk about this is a coup and it's anti-democratic because, the primary vote, didn't happen the way we normally expect it to, or because the letterhead was not the same as what we normally expect it to, or all those kind of things. So let me, before I just do some wrap-ups there on the coup, let me just go back to some of the comments, see if there's some key things here we might want to bring out. Not 100% sure where I got to last time. Got fellow citizens saying, Obama to Biden, when I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master. That's interesting, isn't it? I think it's going to make a very interesting study in a few years about the whole Obama-Biden relationship, but I guess we will probably have to wait a decade or two before that is fully investigated. But I guess one of the things that really strikes me too is the dominance of a small set of families in American politics. The Clintons, the Bushes, the Bidens, the Obamas, really. It's quite astonishing. And I think not entirely healthy. I think I saw some, data point saying that there had not been an election, a presidential election in the United States that didn't feature a Biden, a Bush, or a Clinton since 1976. 3 families. I mean, what does that tell the world about the quality of governance in America? What does it tell America about the quality of their governance that 3 families have been present in all those elections since 1976? And then you have the Kennedys thrown in there as well. Yet another Kennedy running for president. It's silly. And I can see that Kent. Hang on. I've got John Roberts mentioning that a few years later, Yeltsin sent tanks against the Supreme Soviet and given to understand there were several hundred casualties. He then went on to unilaterally abolish the Soviet Union. That is such an important point, John, and it's so often forgotten in the, I guess, Western current day accounts where of Russia and Putin, authoritarian drift and all that sort of stuff. What happened both in terms of the social crisis, but also the I guess betrayal of the liberal political ideals of the liberal, even social democratic ideals of the early 1990s in the Soviet Union and then Russia was quite dramatic. And as you said, I think it was 1994 that Yeltsin turned the tanks and fired on the parliament of the new Soviet Union and did kill people and changed the constitution in ways that were a bit regrettable. And but the Americans heavily backed Yeltsin, and then he was extremely unpopular. And in the 1996 election, the US intervened dramatically in those elections to boost up Yeltsin. So that's a really great point. And what have we got? David K., you mentioned the JFK assassination. If RFK Jr. were ever to get elected, which he won't, it would be fascinating to see if he would finally release the JFK assassination documents. I've heard speculation that Trump may do that if he is elected or declassify them, and indeed that they were some of the documents that were part of the whole business with his documents at Mar-a-Lago and all that sort of thing. So we will see. I don't know terribly much about the JFK assassination, and there are people on the internet who know perhaps more than is good for their souls about that. So I might just leave that one there. And Thanatar13 says the world will probably need a thorough rooting out of the US alphabet agencies and their assets, to be honest, akin to historical Nazi Nazis, but actually bringing to task all the ghouls, not some, and fellow citizen, absolutely. So, hey, maybe I'll start a bit of a campaign on this whole idea of a, international commission to investigate the CIA. And Kent talks about Trump and those files. Fellow citizen, imagine if the ACT had 12 senators voted for by a population with a higher density of bureaucrats. Yeah. David K., On a Tangent, 7 Days in May is a wonderful film about a classic US military coup attempt. I haven't seen that film, but I will check it out. So thanks for the tips. And also, fellow citizen mentions The Palace Letters by Jenny Hocking, which look at the whole Whitlam events. I haven't done a lot of Australian history on the show, so maybe I should do that, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see about that one. And then David K., what was Kevin Rudd's position on the climate change issue in Australia? Was he less proactive in that regard? And that was used against him. A complicated thing. He at one point he said it was the greatest moral challenge of his time, and he made a lot of political hay, so to speak, with the climate change issue, and actually made some serious efforts around it. but he sort of hit a few roadblocks, both internationally and in terms of the actual implementation of his ideas. And in part, some of the resistance to him was from the sort of the people in the Labor Party who are maybe closer to sort of industry and miners and that sort of thing. So that's a very complicated story. But he also kind of made his own mistakes because he took a very political opportunist approach to it and sort of cut off potential supporters in the Greens and that sort of thing. So I think that whole issue is a bit of a tragedy in Australian politics, but I think that will have to be a whole separate discussion another day. And then let me just see, fellow citizen, I see no place for corporate media in a democracy. They can make press releases if they have anything to say. Media should be the preserve of communities and cooperatives. Yeah, well, I have this whole theory of the virtual reality state because there's an enormous level of cooperation, in fact, between journalists and sort of media advisors and government communications officials around the sort of orchestration and manipulation of the news. And I sort of write a bit about that in 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. And I'll probably do something about that on the show again another time. All right, let's come back to our final points about the coup, what it all means, and what the discussion about it is, because I think we need to take seriously people's reaction that this was a violation of norms of democracy, but actually help people think about it clearly and calmly, rather than just say, oh, it's anti-democratic and outrageous and all the rest of it, because I think it is telling us something. I think it is a bit of a distress signal about a problem in, I would say, our governing institutions and culture. It is a breach of a norm or a convention. And because of that, people are reaching for, as Kevin Rudd did in his, coup that killed Australian politics, that sense of some violent breach of a norm. But I think if one also over-dramatises it, one doesn't really see the reality, one doesn't really observe it properly. It's clearly not a military illegal coup. The Biden thing hasn't even removed Joe Biden as president. At least in June 2010, Kevin Rudd's coup removed Kevin Rudd from the office of Prime Minister. But it didn't kill politics in Australia. It might have made it a bit tough for some of the political leaders. It might have, aggravated existing distrust of political leaders, but it clearly did not kill politics. But it does point to problems, I think. And I think I described those, particularly in relationship to America, in my video from last week on the succession crisis. So do check that out if you like. I basically said there was like a 3 or 4-fold succession crisis going on in the United States. There's the succession crisis around the presidency. And what's more, the revealed weakness of America's political institutions, political culture for actually dealing with, well, what do you do when your president is failing in some way? In a parliamentary democracy, you've got to keep the support of the party, the support of the governing majority of the parliament. In America, you have the president and separate executive appointments, and we've had, it seems like decades now, of problems with dealing with disaffection with a current leader. That's what impeachments is about. That's what problems with managing, primaries is about. So there's a problem with that. There's a problem with the leadership elite more generally, and I think there's also problems in the political system in America. The republic is not working as the genius political system that American believes the founders invented. And when those problems reveal themselves, rather than saying, let's reflect calmly on how we can improve our political institutions and culture, they sort of go into this sort of, absolutist rhetoric about coups and democracies. And then finally, I also think it's a problem for American primacy more generally, because how can the world trust the capability of leadership decisions of a state that has so many deeply entrenched problems in its presidency, its constitution, and its leadership elite? So I talked about those things too, but so I think it's important to recognise that a coup is a distress signal about a political system. But if we exaggerate it so extremely by describing it as an anti-democratic, violent coup, we actually don't see the reality of what happened. The pressured withdrawal of Biden from the 2024 election is not a coup, but the events were a breach of norms, both by Biden and by the plotters. The normal primary election process was not followed, but the normal primary election process is unique to America. It's no other democracy in the world has this bizarre system of years of constant campaigning to choose a candidate for president. And in any case, like with the Democratic Party, there hasn't been a normal primary process for some years. But Biden too was breaching convention as well. He's clearly, visibly, obviously propped up by enormous amounts of staff work and media manipulation in his cards and all that sort of thing. He is clearly not the kind of capable figure one would expect to be a president. So it's all very well to talk about the actions of the people who engineered the coup against Biden, but I think we also need to think about, well, what does it reveal about America that a president, like a stubborn old man who's failing visibly, can sort of dig his heels in and stay in power in this sort of way until he's literally confronted with the never used constitutional amendment, the 25th Amendment, to remove him for lack of political capability. That, I think, is as much a breach of convention, as much a anti-democratic, if you like, feature of these recent events as anything. So let's not compare it falsely to a military coup, but let's understand what political norms were breached and whether those breaches point to bigger cracks in American leadership. So let me just have another last little look at any last comments before signing off. Been going for 90 minutes now, so I hope everyone's been enjoying the show. We talked about Kevin Rudd's position on climate change. Bijou Smith says less about the man, more about the system they operate within and their ignorance despite having all the credentials. I think I understand. I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to there, Bijou, but I think that's right. We need to not personalise it. It's the same thing with Trump. I mean, in a way, the whole reaction to Trump is similarly a kind of here is an outsider who is not operating against our normal expectations of how people behave in politics. And people sort of, turn that into, all the sort of extreme rhetoric that is used about Trump. Not endorsing or supporting Trump or whatever, but I think it's a clear aspect of the, Trump derangement syndrome is that people have a overexcited response to the fact that he's an unconventional figure who's come from outside of politics, who's somewhat ham-fistedly attempting to do certain things for reasons I don't totally understand and not entirely a little bit suspicious of. But he's certainly no Stalin. He's certainly no Hitler. Kent says credentials are equal to compromised. Fellow citizen, I see no place. Yeah, well, I talked about that one, didn't I? Thanatar 13, Bijou Smith agreed if Murdoch did not exist, Anglo-American would have to invent a Murdoch, though the evil of that man can't be understated. Yeah, well, this is the thing about the what I call a virtual reality state. And, I mean, we can all fall into it because, like, a lot of what people talk about with, politics is the theatre of politics, the sport of politics. It's not the actual practical day-to-day reality of how exactly do we solve this problem of, like in America, like there's so much spectacle of politics, but they have a lousy police system. They have a lousy secret service, it seems now. They have a lousy health system. They have a failing military. They have the world's most chaotically ill-coordinated government, I would say. They have so many practical problems that they just never seem to get around to practically solving. Comments about the Roosevelt family, a correction rather than a coup, since Biden's candidacy from the DNC was unusual even by their usual standards. That's a very absolutely right point, fellow citizen. As I say, like, was Biden was the Democratic Party following normal democratic processes? I don't really think so. And people are getting the governments they allow. Well, that's true. But again, the reality is we as ordinary citizens don't have a whole lot of control about what people in governments really do. So, I think it's also about people get the governments that the culture and institutions of government nurture. And my argument is we need to pay a lot more attention to strengthening that culture and institutions of government, and not just thinking that like some sort of popular revolt is going to fix things. You actually need people who sort of are in those institutions who act virtuously, if you like, and within strong, capable institutions that actually do the things that they're meant to do. David K says, I'm going to sign off and go to bed. Thank you, Kent. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to celebrating your reaching the 20k subscriber milestone in the near future. Thank you, Kent, and what a wonderful thing. And Kent says, you're welcome, good night. And I'm so glad everyone here in the chat was having a bit of a chat amongst themselves. I hope that's also been interesting and enjoyable to all the viewers of the replay. Of course, you can watch the chat and the replay online. Let me, in closing, just mention a couple of things. Of course, please remember to go to jeffrich.substack.com. So that's the third of those 2 points. if you like this video, do like, share, and subscribe. Bump it up there in the YouTube algorithm. Share it on other social media. Tell your friends about the Burning Archive YouTube channel. And leave me a comment, because I do like to respond to comments. You can support me by hitting the thanks button on the YouTube and super chat if you're online, and you can go to Buy Me a Coffee, Burning Archive. But I think the very best place to do, if you're interested in what I have to say and interested in the kind of ideas we've been talking about, interested in kind of making sense of this puzzling, changing world with some quality world history, then go to jeffrich.substack.com. And I've just brought one of my courses, my guide to geopolitics in history, onto my Substack. So if you sign up to the Substack, you'll see how you can access that. And I'd love to see you there on the Substack. I'd love to. I think I'm at about 800 subscribers on Substack, and I'd love to get to 1,000. So if you haven't already, if you're a viewer of the Burning Archive YouTube channel, I'm sure you'll actually get a lot out of the Substack. So go over there, and you can also choose to upgrade your subscription. I think it's like $80 US, maybe $80 US per year, or $8 a month, to join me there, and you get my my weekly posts, my deeper dives, my sort of workshops, and my audio book readings of key essays from history, and some great discussions with the readers at the Substack there as well. And you can also, if you like, join the Burning Archive YouTube community. So if I've kind of lost the chat there, let me just say thanks everyone. Thanks Kent, thanks Thanatar13, David K, fellow citizen, Bijou Smith. Who else have we got who've joined? John Roberts, Brisk Gift 75. I said David K, didn't I? And Kent. You guys had such an amazing discussion here. And GL and Fish. Yeah, great question from Fish. Stay strong, Fish. Don't get too depressed about the world. We will find our way through it. And as I think Voltaire once said, when the world's falling apart, tend your garden. And I think that might be a good, or cultivate your garden, both in reality, your actual garden, and the metaphorical garden of, the culture and yourself and all that sort of stuff. I think that's probably the best thing to do when the news of the world is getting you down. I'll be back next week for another live stream, and I think on Thursday or Friday this week, I'm also bringing out a video on Timothy Snyder, the historian and advocate of Ukraine, about what happens when historians tell big lies. So make sure you check that out, and I hope it's been an interesting and informative discussion for you all, and I'll see you next week.